All right. So a little bit contrary to what Helen said, I'm mostly going to be doing a forward-looking talk rather than a backward-looking talk because we only did one MT survey in SIRP, but we have been very busy since then. So what I thought I'd like to do to start is give you a bit of why we bother with MT. It's gained popularity since we did the survey in 2016, but it still is a little bit of an esoteric thing to be doing for a lot of the companies. So there's really the underlying reason why we're doing these big regional MT surveys is there's this beautiful case example of how these big crustal conductors are potentially associated with mineralization from South Australia. And that's this example here. So down in the Gawler Craton, we've got a big, deep crustal conductivity anomaly that sits in the mid to lower crust and then has an association with these fingers of elevated conductivity that come up and are associated with deposits like Olympic Dam famously, but some other secondary mineralization occurrences out on the flanks. And then we've got an example here from the 2016 survey as well in Cloncurry, where we've got a big sheeted conductor that merges down into a mid-crustal conductivity feature and then has these fingers of conductivity that come up, and this one is associated with Ernest Henry. So what we're really doing with these MT surveys is I've heard it described as we're not looking for a needle in a haystack, we're running around looking for haystacks with MT data. So really trying to image what's going on in the deeper crust so we can get some context for these smaller anomalies. So this is what we've got across Mount Isa at the moment. As I said, we only did one MT survey as part of SREP, and that was the Cloncurry Extension Survey. That's this little black guy up here. So the black data is new data in the small points. These big black sites are Auslan sites from Geoscience Australia, not us. And the red sites are historic ones. So we already had quite a reasonable coverage across Mount Isa, quite a lot of profiles and a big array down in the south. But we have focused on either acquisition or inversion. So today I'll talk you through primarily the inversion space that we're working in, but we have done quite a lot of acquisition as well. So we completed this one and released it this year. It was seriously delayed by COVID, so it took a little while to get out. And then we also acquired these two profiles down in the south. And I'll give you a bit of background on why we're down there and what we're trying to do, and then some inversion work. So as a basis for understanding where we're at with the electrical structure in Mount Isa, what I like to use is the Auslan Model that Geoscience Australia have produced recently. So that's based on these large black sites only. These ones that are not filled in have only been acquired this year and they're not released yet, but I have assurances that they're nearly done and will be available soon. So what we can see, so this is a depth slice at about 30 kilometres. We're right in the zone where we're looking for those big crustal conductors like the one under Olympic Dam. And we already know that we've got one of those conductors down the eastern succession. So it's big enough to have a name. It's called the Carpentaria Conductivity Anomaly. Sits under the Cloncurry region, heads up to the north and potentially extends down to the south, but this part of the model is completely unconstrained by current data extents. And we've got a big resistor block through the guts of Mount Isa and then another more moderately conductive feature down the western succession of Mount Isa. So this is kind of our current framework for understanding what these smaller surveys are telling us. So I'll run you through the projects that I'm working on at the moment. So one of the primary focuses I have is on inverting some of these data sets. So there's quite a lot of data now, and particularly this one up in Cloncurry is 1,000 sites. So it's 500 new sites from the Cloncurry extension, plus about 470 sites from the existing data in 2016. And this is actually a monstrous data set in MT terms. So finding enough computational resources to invert this data is challenging. And so this is work that we're doing in government to try and help people use the data we've actually collected. So we've got three main aims for that inversion work. Obviously, we want to see what the structures are. That's like number one. But we're also trying to work out if there's a way we can do inversion better. So can we invert different parts of the data? Can we incorporate regional models like Auslan to try and make the inversion process faster, more reliable, so we can get from data to models more quickly in the future? So this is the context of that complete Cloncurry survey. So we've got all of the sites here, 1,000 sites here sitting broadly between the Quamby Fault here, down the western side of the survey, and the Mount Margaret Fault, which wraps down the east of the survey. We do have a nice deep crustal seismic line from 2007, I think it was, done by Geoscience Australia, to provide us some context from the seismic method. So this is a new interpretation that we have almost released the report for. This is the work that we've been doing with Karen and Dominic, trying to reinterpret all the deep crustal seismic lines. So essentially the context that we're sitting in for this survey here is we're on top of this big dipping crustal penetrating structure called the Gidger structure, and we're looking really in this overhanging piece of crust in here. If we invert some data along that seismic line, so just a 2D inversion, we can see we've got quite a large dipping conductive anomaly and some indication here of some back thrust conductive features. So this is what we're trying to zoom in on and get some better resolution modeling on. This is the 2016 inversion result. So it was released a couple of years later. It's a series of depth slices. I wanted to show this so we've got some context for understanding what the new models, how they disagree or agree with this current model. So we've got this big conductor down the eastern side, which is actually an expression of the Carpentaria conductivity anomaly. So it does exist from all the way down in the deep to mid crust, coming up to the surface in the east here. And then we've got these more isolated anomalies that sit in through the middle of the survey. And this one here that is quite large and quite extensive at depth is the one associated with Ernest Henry. So if I then jump to some very early in progress 3D inversion results for the whole data array. So I have literally pulled these off my computer, like my supercomputer a couple of days ago, and it's still running. So this is very much an in progress inversion result. And because it's in progress, it hasn't fully agreed with all of the data yet. So what I've got here is a plot of RMS. So RMS is simply the difference between what we measured the data to be, the MT data in the field, and what the model predicts the data to be. So if you've got a good model, it should be around 1. So for the bits in here that are white or yellow, we've got pretty good agreement between calculated and observed data. And then down here on the southwestern part of the survey, we're not explaining the data very well. So that just means that this part of the model up here is a lot more reliable, and then what's going on down here is not yet in agreement with the data. So word of caution, don't trust everything in this inversion yet. It is a progress one. But pleasingly, we can see that we've got the start of this big conductive feature here, wrapping up the eastern side of the entire survey. So the 2016 extent would have stopped about here. We can see it continues and potentially intensifies as it goes further north. We do have a big conductive feature that runs up along the Quamby Fault as well. And then we've got this isolated conductor here in the center of the survey. Oh, no. There it is, that guy. So we've got this big crustal conductor down here on the, what's that, eastern side of the survey, and then the western one associated with the Quamby Fault. And then this one here in the center of the array is something that I am quite interested in. It's not too bad in terms of data fit, but obviously there's a little way to go on this one yet. So if I take a few slices out of this model just to see what we're actually looking at, up in the north, we've got these two big conductive features that converge in the mid to lower crust. So in the mid crust, let's say, we only really have resolution down to 20 kilometers at the moment based on the frequency range that I've inverted. If I take a section across this smaller feature in the center of the array, it actually turns out to be quite large and connected down into these other features at depth. We've got some shielding going on in this part of the model so far, so that we can't actually see through this conductive basin yet because the inversion hasn't progressed far enough. But I do expect that this conductive feature in the eastern part of the survey will continue down into the lower crust, consistent with the 2016 model. And then in the south, we don't have a lot of structure yet, which is very consistent with not fitting the data that well yet. So the inversion hasn't got to the stage where it's populating data or structures in this part of the model. So that's in progress. Hopefully I can get that out in some way very soon. It'll take a little bit of testing before we're sure that all these structures are robust and well constrained by the data, but that work is definitely underway. And then the other focus of the inversion work that we've been up to is down here in the south. So this is a survey that was collected in-house at the GSQ this year and then released quite recently. And we're already trying to do some inversion work here. And really what we're doing here is trying to track those three big crustal features down to the south of the province to see what how far they continue to the south and if they look the same. From the seismic interpretation work with Karen, there's also a reasonable expectation that in this part of the world, there's some covariance between resistivity and density. So we're looking at doing a trial joint inversion to see if we can get a bit more out of this wide-spaced MT by incorporating some gravity into the inversion modeling. Again, so these are in progress results. This one actually fits the data quite well. So I haven't included an RMS plot on this one. These are the crustal blocks interpreted from that new seismic interpretation. And the Pitta block is essentially the basement to Mount Isa. It runs in an elongate north-south block that fairly well matches the resistive part of the lower crust in the Auslan model. So what we can see from this north-south inversion here is that we've got a big resistive block on the north of this around Boulia. And then as we go further south, the resistivity is reduced to only part of the crust, not part of the mantle anymore. And then obviously as we go into the Thompson origin to the south, we've got quite a different conductivity response. So quite a simple model here, but very consistent with what we understand of the geology. And then for the east-west line, the inversion is running quite well. It matches the data quite well and is very consistent with the 2D inversions as well. So again, I haven't included an RMS plot on this one, but it's quite reliable so far. Obviously, it needs a little bit more testing, but if we look at the structures returned by this inversion compared to the seismic interpretation, we can see that we've got a big broad area of conductive crust that sits underneath the Gidja structure. So this is the normal terrain, and that's significantly more conductive than the adjacent Pitta block, which sits under Mount Isa. And then we've got these big faults from the interpretation of the seismic, and there's conductivity anomalies associated with these faults in here. So not dissimilar to what we see a long way further north up around Cloncurry. And just to drive that point home, I've picked out a section of the IG1 seismic line in white, which is the little pink cropped area, and roughly the same pink cropped area out of the CF3 seismic line. And I'm looking at what the conductivity response relative to this Gidja structure is. And I've highlighted the Gidja structure here. So what we thought might be happening is we've got a continuation of the conductivity anomaly, the Carpentier conductivity anomaly that sits up here. In theory, it should continue down to the south, and there's some modelling that suggests it does based on very wide space data. So we thought that we should see something very, very similar down here on CF3 to what we see further north on IG1. And if you squint and with a bit of belief, it's similar, but it's not quite the stonking great conductor in the lower crust that we thought we might see down here. So we need to have a think about why there might be a difference in the crust under the Gidger structure to the south of the inlier compared to what's going on up around Cloncurry. But we still have these conductive features that come up off the structure. So there's some similarities, but not as many as you would hope for. So where we're at the moment in understanding where these deep crustal conductivity features go, we're absolutely confident that this this resistive block down through the middle of Mount Isa continues south to at least this extent here based on the new data. This is really the extent of that resistor at the mantle level, so right down at the moho. So the crustal extent of this resistive block is actually a little further south than this. Very confident that this structure here continues down to the south as well. You can see it in the western edge of this Isa extension array, and it's on the western end of this CF2 line as well. But there's a few more questions about what's going on with the Carpentaria conductivity anomaly. Is it the same structure that continues south, but it's less intense, or is there something very different going on at Cloncurry compared to what's going on further south? So we don't have a good answer for this one yet, which is where the next bit of MT work comes in. So this is only a proposed site plan. It's not been tendered. It's only what I would like to do if I can get all of my stars to align, but it's essentially a 3-component MT survey. We've got a fairly high resolution profile along the 94 seismic line, so we can get some seismic MT comparison through the center of Mount Isa, and then a backbone of 10-kilometre spaced sites down the eastern succession to try and track what's going on between Cloncurry and this data along CF3, so we can get some understanding of how and where the CCA changes. And then a series of 3 profiles down in the south of Mount Isa, trying to see if the conductive anomaly actually continues past the end of this Mount Isa province boundary. So trying to really understand what it might be. I hope I get to do this whole survey, fingers crossed. But that is it.
Thanks, Janelle. Does anyone have any questions for Janelle? I think we've got where's the other mic? Oh, Dave.
Thanks, Janelle. That was a really nice presentation. Could you provide some geographic context to the location of the central anomaly that you pointed, the small anomaly? I believe it's close to Cloncurry, is that correct?
In the Cloncurry inversion? Yeah. Not off the top of my head. It's up to the northwest of Cloncurry. So Cloncurry is essentially here. Okay. So Cloncurry is about there, Ernest Henry's here, and then that's where the anomaly is. Does that help?
Okay, thank you.
I'm sure it'll all come online. You'll be able to download it and compare it when it's finished. Yep.
We've got some questions online from Richard Scott. So first one was, Janelle, are you planning on making the different types of varieties of inversion models available for comparison?
Yeah, absolutely.
So making a set of inversions rather than a final. Yep, great.
Yeah, I'll give you the one I like the most, but I'm not going to pretend it's the best one.
Yep, no, that's good. And then there was some question. He saw some research by Max Moorcamp on the joint MT graving version. Is that the kind of work you're looking at doing? Yeah,
yes, I'm actually working with Max on that one.
Perfect. Great. And I'll just check if there's on the chat as well. Oh, and the last one here, when do you expect to have the inversion from Cloncurry completed and published? And then anomaly to the west, any detail? That's from John Menzies.
When do I expect to have it? When I hope that I'll have enough inversion modeling done by, it's a good question. The models do take a really long time to run. So these models are taking a week each, and I probably need to run 20. Yep. So it is going to take a little while. I would expect to have something usable by February.
Awesome. Great. So that's what we got online, but thank you.